Hi, I'm Jialu Streeter. Today, it's really my pleasure to have Steve Smith on my channel. Steve is a senior fellow with the Pacific Research Institute, and he's a former peace officer and a college instructor. Steve has worked as a municipal police officer, deputy sheriff, and district attorney's investigator. So welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Public safety is a big challenge in a lot of major cities in California. 60% of residents in San Francisco named crime and public safety as a major issue. In recent years, a lot of retail businesses are closing their stores in downtown areas. And according to Whole Foods spokesperson, the company closed its flagship store in San Francisco to ensure the safety of its employees. Drug abuse is out in the daylight, so it's no longer a secret or shame for the person who uses drugs. And some people have pointed out a lot of the rising challenges we see today in crime, in public safety, in drug addiction, and homelessness. They are correlated with Proposition 47. Could you just briefly tell us what Proposition 47 is, and then what kind of changes this proposition brought us?
Sure. Well, as you said, Proposition 47 was passed by the voters in 2014. It raised the thresholds for the commission of a felony from $400 to $950 for a number of crimes, including, shoplifting, buying and selling and stolen property. But it also eliminated the felony crime of commercial burglary. Burglary is defined as the entry into a protected structure to commit grand or petty theft or any other felony. There were a number of ways that you could prove that they entered with the intent. Well, now it doesn't matter anymore if you entered with the intent or not. It's just a misdemeanor, as long as the loss value stays under $950. One of the saddest aspects of Prop 47 was that it reduced possession of some dangerous drugs from felonies to misdemeanors. And again, it was well-intentioned. The idea was if we reduced it to misdemeanors and then added some mandatory treatment or counseling to it, that would have a more therapeutic and long-term benefit to the individuals who were addicted. And then the last aspect was that people with multiple misdemeanor convictions for theft prior to Prop 47 could be charged with a felony, and now those multiple prior convictions for petty thefts could not be elevated to a felony.
Some people may argue, hey, misdemeanor is still a charge. Theoretically, you could still go to jail for up to a year. So why is that not a legitimate argument? Right.
Well, the groundwork for what I think is the failure of Prop 47 was actually laid 3 years earlier in 2011 when the legislature passed AB 109. AB 109 is a law that transferred what are known as triple non-offenders, non-violent, non-sexual, non-serious offenders from the state prison system to county jails. So when AB 109 was passed, nearly 75,000 inmates were transferred out of the state prison system into the county jails. In addition to that, any felons who were newly convicted of these new AB 109 felonies would also serve their time in county jail rather than going to state prison. So what that did is impacted the county jail populations such that relatively low-level misdemeanors aren't being held for not a year, not even 30 days in many cases, or not at all. They're just simply given probation because there's no room. So sheriffs have the discretion to release inmates if their population counts rise over thresholds that are prohibited by the state. So, yes, while it's true that Prop 47 crimes could still serve a term in county jail, the reality is they're not.
Do you think there are any psychological impact on the criminals? Do they know about this change?
They absolutely do. Rather than being booked in the county jail, or even if they are booked, they know they're going to be released right away. Most of them aren't booked. What they are, if the victims even bother to call the police and the police are fortunate enough to be able to arrest them, they're released on a citation, a promise to appear. Just like if you're pulled over for a traffic violation, you sign the ticket, that's a promise to appear at the next court date or pay the fine. It's the same for these misdemeanors. They sign a promise to appear. It's sometime, maybe 30 days down the road, but then they just don't even bother to appear because there's no sanctions for that. There are not enough police or deputy sheriffs to go out and arrest these people under the bench warrants that now exist for them. So it's essentially a free pass. And they really just, there's no way that, by the way, they can stack up all these misdemeanors into a felony. They know that they could commit 10 petty thefts, have 10 promise to appears, 10 failures to appear, and maybe they are finally arrested. Well, the judge can't do anything more than if it was one count because of population problems in the county jails.
Say someone walk into Safeway and take, say, $900 worth of merchandise, right, which is below this 950 threshold. And now Safeway, can they apprehend the person? Can they stop the person from stealing?
So the law certainly allows retail establishments to protect their property, and citizens arrests are perfectly legal in California, and most shopping or lifting arrests prior to Prop 47 are citizens arrests who are then whose arrestees are then turned over to the police. So yes, as a private business person, you can protect your store's property. However, you run some risks when you do so, right? And shoplifters know that. I recently wrote in a blog that the Gilroy outlets, which are a rather well-known factory outlet complex in Gilroy, California, has about 96 stores in it, and only 5 of them have a policy that involves even calling the police. The other 90 stores just let the property go. Now, most of these stores, are national retailers, if not international retailers, and they can spread that loss over their entire business operations, and they can also raise the prices to cover their losses. For them, it's a business decision, and they know they don't have the support of the law right now. So they've made the business decision in order to minimize risk to their employees and customers to allow that property to be stolen.
The stores not calling the police, number one, that causes underreporting of the crime.
Absolutely.
So that means the crime data that we're seeing right now are potentially underestimating how many crimes are really happening. And number two, the stores not calling the police and not trying to stop the shoplifting activity is sending a signal to the potential future criminals. Nothing's going to happen to you if you were to steal from us.
That's absolutely true. And we saw that played out, 2 Christmases ago in Union Square in San Francisco, where very brazen thieves committed mass thefts in some of the high-end retail stores that are in the Union Street area. And these aren't, criminals that appeared to be on the margins of society. I saw in the video some of the getaway vehicles were BMWs and Audis. So, we're dealing with, professional thieves really who, operated at least then with impunity in the heart of San Francisco's most prestigious shopping district.
So let's continue the chain of events. So just now we were like, hypothetically, we have this criminal walking into Safeway stealing, and say somehow a brave employee called the police and say the police showed up and arrested the person. What happens next?
So again, they may get booked into the county jail. I can't speak to every county's policy. The decisions as to whether or not they would book somebody in the county jail, one starts with, will the county jail accept them? Because county jails from time to time put out the word that they won't accept new misdemeanors in custody. The person arrested may have arrest warrants, right? Other reasons why they might be arrested. When they're detained, they might be searched and find a weapon or some other reason to book them. Absent any of that, the only thing that will happen is the citation will be issued with a promise to appear at some time in the future.
A promise to appear. So that's also, it's the same as bench warrant? Is that the same thing?
No, a bench warrant would be issued for failure to appear. So at that court date, which has been set in the future, if they fail to show up at that, then a bench warrant would be issued automatically by the judge. However,
yeah,
pick any urban county in the state, and I guarantee you there are, in large counties, tens of thousands of warrants that are unserved.
so even
Because
if you don't show up and you get a bench warrant, and you still most likely nothing was going to happen to this criminal.
that's correct. And so they've learned, right? They've learned that the law has very little force behind it right now.
If somebody was given a promise to appear, like, why would they ever show up if they know this chain of events? If they know like nothing, why would they even show up? Like the ones who show up seems like not rational to me.
Given the state of the law, obeying the law is not a rational choice. The rational choice is to ignore the law because the law has no consequences. So they're making a value judgment or a cost-benefit analysis, to use an economic term, right, where the benefit of being a criminal far outweighs the cost.
Yeah. I mean, I have heard so many people say the criminals, they don't know the law, they don't know the rules, like, we're thinking too much. They don't really understand what Proposition 47 is. So you don't think that's the case, right? You think they really
Prop 47 has been the law for 9 years. There has been plenty of time for, the criminally oriented community to learn and understand how it works and to pass that information on to their friends and associates.
How does that chain of events affect the police morale?
Well, it's very damaging to morale, both to the police and to victims who see themselves being repeatedly victimized, right? In many cases by the same people. From the police perspective, it goes towards the idea of revolving door justice, right? Where you make the effort, right, to arrest somebody, conduct the investigation, write the reports, book the evidence, book the individual into jail, only to find that they are either never appear in court or they're given a very lenient sentence.
So when we see crime data going down, the official crime data going down, that could be one, it could be really crime is down. It could also be because the reporting is down. It could be because the arrest is down. Right? Is it fair for me to say that?
Absolutely true. And we've actually known this for a long time because we look at survey data through mainly the National Crime Victimization Survey, but there are also surveys conducted by, educational institutions and think tanks, that are measuring unreported crime, if you will. So, rather than, rely simply on reported crime and arrest statistics, what they're going out and doing is surveying people, and then you see this gap, and it's known in criminal justice circles as the dark figure of crime. We can also look at other sources like retail associations who report their losses and then kind of compare those losses to the official reports and see that there's a dramatic difference. Well, obviously homicide is probably the most, accurate because, somebody is dead and that's a pretty hard thing to hide. And even if you've hidden that, the fact that they're missing. So, we consider homicide reports very accurate. Aggravated assault statistics tend to be very accurate because people who are gravely injured, as a result of a crime tend to report it. Auto thefts tend to be very reliable because people need the report to get their insurance claim. So, auto thefts, by the way, are up. Homicides are up. Aggravated assaults are up. The only areas where you see crimes going down are really the kind of crimes that were addressed by Prop 47 and a disheartened victim community. Really, the only way you can show that crime is reducing is if you mix all crimes together right now, right? Because there's enough so-called reduction in property crimes that if you mix that with violent crimes, you can get a net reduction figure. Or what they do is reach further back in history to go, well, yes, crime might be up a bit right now, but it's actually lower than its historical highs from maybe the 1970s. So, you know, it sounds almost silly and maybe a little cynical on my part. Well, you can reach far enough back in time to make almost any statistic look good, you know, if that's your objective.
So let's talk about the effect of Proposition 47 on drug use. So we know in San Francisco, in Santa Clara, in LA, if you just look at the drug overdose dashboard and government website, they all went up, tripled in some places, doubled in some other places since 2014. What is the connection between Prop 47 to drug use and drug possession, and maybe also drug trading?
Right. So, you know, that last aspect of Prop 47 that we began our discussion talking about was the reduction in personally used quantities of hard drugs, right? Drugs like opiates, methamphetamine, et cetera, being reduced to misdemeanors. Now, you know, it's an open legal debate as to what constitutes a personal use quantity of drugs versus a saleable quantity of drugs. Typically, a sales case is made off of how a drug is packaged. You know, if you have several grams of methamphetamine, if it's broken into small plastic baggies, multiple, then chances are maybe you're a dealer, right? If you have gram scales, you know, these little portable electronic gram scales to weigh drugs, that's a sign you're a dealer. What sounds kind of crazy is that you could actually have a larger quantity of drugs, but it's packaged in one package. That could be a personal use case, whereas you could have a lesser amount of drugs packaged for sales, and that would be a sales case and still is a felony. However, a recent act by the state legislature, and I'm failing to remember the bill number, makes possession of fentanyl for sales a wobbler, and a wobbler in legal jargon is a crime that can be charged as a misdemeanor or a felony. So that we've actually allowed fentanyl dealing to be reduced to a misdemeanor. And I've already explained what the consequences of people who are arrested for misdemeanors are. So it should be no surprise that fentanyl is readily available on the streets of some of our biggest cities.
In San Francisco, when police car driving past those corners, they see someone using drugs. Do they do anything about it?
No. Again,
why not?
It's a misdemeanor. There are no net effects. They won't be held in jail.
Yeah.
It just
why bother, right?
Well, it is sort of a why bother thing. But also from a practical standpoint, there are generally more serious calls pending. So we also have staffing issues at work right now. You have a 10-hour shift to work, right? Arresting somebody for a crime that's not going to get prosecuted takes hours out of that day. It's not just putting handcuffs on and putting them in the car, right? It's getting to the county jail. In San Francisco's case, that means going to San Bruno, right? So you've got, as something as almost silly as driving time to consider. You have to book the evidence, right? You have to test the drugs, right? To get a presumptive positive to verify that it is in fact drugs. You have to write the investigative report, right? All of this takes hours out of your day. And there are more serious crimes occurring that we already discussed that are increasing. And so, they have to sort of self-triage their case. The calls come up on their computer screens. They're, often coded by seriousness. So you respond to the most serious ones first. And, even when, people say, well, I just saw a police officer drive by something, that doesn't mean they weren't going anywhere.
So let's go back to drug treatment for a little bit. What has happened? What has changed since Prop 47 in terms of drug court, drug treatment? How likely is a criminal to accept a treatment assigned by the court and all that?
The reduction in penalties under Prop 47 for drug possession cases, and I might add being under the influence of drugs, really are interconnected with Prop 36, which was passed 14 years earlier, right? The voters passed Prop 36 to give drug offenders the option of having to participate in a treatment program rather than being convicted of a felony. Funds were provided, and there was a lot of success between 2000 and I would say about 2006. And then state funds started to dry up for treatment options. And then in 2008, we had the financial crisis that further strained state budgets. To the point. So it sort of failed under its own weight. It's, the promise was very high, and initially funds were available. And then when Prop 47 hit in 2014, that really killed the drug courts because, to give the carrot and stick analogy, right? The carrot under Prop 36 was if you participate in treatment, your case will be dismissed, and those were felony cases. So there was a real incentive, right, to succeed, right? Well, as a result of Prop 47, there's no longer a felony consequence. And, to quote a friend of mine in the district attorney's office here in Santa Cruz, he said they just simply walked away because they knew then there was nothing anybody could do. I would add another component to it is that really fentanyl is unlike any drug that's hit, at least in my career span. We thought crack was bad, in the 80s, right? And then we thought methamphetamine and ice was pretty bad in the 90s and early 2000s. And now fentanyl is hit. And by far, fentanyl is the worst drug I have seen in my career. In San Francisco, more people died of fentanyl overdoses and methamphetamine overdoses during COVID than died of COVID.
I see. Wow.
Right? So it definitely qualifies as an epidemic.
I see.
The other phenomenon that occurred is that in drug treatment, a school of thought emerged that compelling people to participate in treatment was not an effective way to treat them. That voluntary treatment and treatment on demand was a more effective route because they would come to treatment then in a frame of mind that was predisposed towards succeeding in treatment. And I don't think that's entirely wrong, except again, fentanyl struck. And fentanyl is an extremely powerful drug. And it's no exaggeration to say that somebody could be addicted after the first 2 or 3 uses of it, such that, it drives people to deeply antisocial behaviors and risky behaviors in a way that I've never seen replicated, not even during the crack crisis of the 80s. So people stealing, assaulting, prostituting themselves in Northern California, well, it also has the highest rate of theft, even reporting theft, right? So they go hand in hand, right?
Because they have to steal to support
almost uninterrupted, you have an almost uninterrupted supply of fentanyl hitting the streets, and you have a supply of cash because they can commit theft very easily without getting arrested so that they can feed their habits. So all these things are interconnected. Take any one of them apart, and they're not bad ideas, right? Let's treat people therapeutically. Let's not stigmatize people as drug addicts and give them minor sentences and hope that they'll find their way to rehabilitation, right? Let's transfer non-serious offenders out of state prison and move them to county jails where they'll be closer to home. And we know if they have good family ties, their chances of success on parole are good, except that we've overcrowded our county jails and we can't hold these drug offenders anymore. We've decriminalized theft and thus enabled them access to ready cash in order to support a drug habit that also no longer has any legal consequences. And all of that has kind of created, I know the death spiral analogy is commonly attributed, to economic things in these cities, but it's sort of a death spiral in the criminal justice system, and certainly the lives and deaths of the victims.
So do normal Californian voters even understand what Proposition 47 is when they sign up on it? And Prop 47 had a really beautiful name, right?
Yes.
Safe neighborhood, safe school. Yeah.
And that's what they do. Prop 57 had a similar title. And we look at the title, we look at the brief analysis of the bill. Maybe they read the arguments in favor or against the bill. Um, and let's face it, some of these things are well financed. They get a lot of TV time.
Yeah.
And on the face of it, again, they look good.
So it's almost 10 years since the passing of Prop 47, right? So yes, we signed up on that as voters. We didn't understand, but now we see the consequences. We see rising crime, we see drug overdoses, we see homelessness. So do voters now make a connection? We passed the Prop 47, this is what we got. Do they make that connection between the dots?
Yeah, that's a political analysis that we'll have to see. Up to this point, no, they haven't made that connection.
Yeah.
Because reforms, both in the form of propositions, have failed, and certainly reforms in the Assembly Public Safety Committee and the Senate Public Safety Committee have failed, and are almost voted on partisan lines.
If we were to repeal Prop 47, what would you see as the major roadblocks?
The roadblocks is incarceration capacity, meaning do we have enough available space in our correctional system to provide an effective deterrent? I would think in these shoplifting cases, relatively short sentences are going to probably do the trick.
Some people may say, if you want to repeal Prop 47, all you want is to lock everybody up and then use prison as the solution. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely don't agree with that. I think that Californians want a criminal justice system that works, and they want criminals to come out of prison better people than they went in. That's why they consistently vote for rehabilitative programs and therapeutic options to the formal criminal justice system. However, in the case of a lot of these, in the case of thefts, career criminals, in the case of addiction, people who have serious psychological and physical addictions to drugs, that the way to break their habits is possibly to have the intervention of the criminal justice system to provide the motivation they need to change their lives.
I see.
In most cases, drug addicts, especially opiate addicts, are really just trying to avoid their next low, right? Because the effects of withdrawal are horrible in their cases. So, their need to get the drugs drives their behavior. It drives them to commit crimes, right? And often what they need is, a radical, healthcare intervention in an environment that protects them from the temptations of the street. Because even a medically supervised withdrawal isn't going to be a great experience.
Right.
And you need a locked facility, and I'm not saying jails, but maybe a locked healthcare facility or something that's going to give them the jump start they need to succeed in treatment. So
when Prop 47 was passed, one of the promises it made was to provide more drug treatments, more therapeutic treatments for drug users. So do you have any observations or data? Do you think since 2014, we actually have fulfilled that promise?
No, and I think the fatal overdose rate is proof of that. If the funds that were intended were being more effectively used, then I think we wouldn't see that increase. But again, we have a system of treatment that's based on the forbearance of the addicts themselves and their willingness to participate, which is really, it's kind of an absurd expectation on the part of people who authored Prop 47 the day after Chesapeake's recall in the Atlantic Monthly, of all places. And it was written by a San Francisco author who reported seeing a frequent drug addict in her neighborhood. How in one instance he was passed out in an overdose state. The police were called, paramedics arrived, he was revived with naloxone or Narcan, right? Yet 2 homeless advocates also jumped that call. And in police work, jumping a call means somebody listened to the scanner traffic and showed up. And what they did is they showed up and convinced the person who had just been revived not to go with the police or take the ambulance ride to the hospital, that it was their civil right to not do that and to seek another option. And that's what he chose. And the epitaph to the story was 2 weeks later, she saw him again, dead on the sidewalk in her neighborhood.
So who were the people who intercepted and persuaded?
So there are homeless civil rights advocates who believe that the use of the criminal justice system, even at the therapeutic level, is contrary to what is ultimately good for these people.
Mm.
And they believe that they will be criminalized by it, even though the law doesn't really allow that. You know, the political view is that the greater evil right now are the injustices in the criminal justice system, wherein people who've been arrested are viewed as the real victims, and crime victims are really just sort of collateral damage as they work through a fairly radical reform agenda to address, you know, social, racial, and ethnic inequities in the system. And again, you know, people call that conflict theory, you know, where the causes of crime are based on, you know, social conflicts based on injustice. I tend to be more an advocate of choice theory, that, you know, that crime is a choice. You know, I've been to a lot of poor countries in the world in my work, right? I just recently returned from Albania, which has sort of an unsavory reputation as a drugs transshipment point, you know, from the poppy growing areas of the Near and Middle East, you know, through Europe, through the Balkans, you know, into Europe. Yet street level crime is very, very low. In Albania, there are kiosk businesses on every sidewalk with open goods, you know, just hanging from racks outside. Yet they are never the victims of crime. You know, crime and, you know, poverty don't always go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, for a lot of people, it's a choice. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now. And sadly, I think the people forgotten in all of this are victims.
Right. Well, this is great. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for sharing your time with me and sharing your insights with me.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.